exactly what the book is, which is boring. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Faith and thank you so much for watching. This is my July reading wrap up, but this month I'm doing something a bit different. Instead of just filming a recap of my month at the end of July or beginning of August, I'm going to take you guys with me throughout the month and basically film whenever I finish a book. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, I just have a lot going on at the end of July and beginning of August, so I'm not even sure if I'll have the time to film and edit this at that time. So to make it easier for me, I'm just going to film and edit as I go. Also, I've noticed that I tend to give a lot more attention to the books that I read at the end of the month than the beginning, just because the ones at the end of the month are fresher on my mind. So in order to give you the most accurate feelings I actually had about the book, I figured why not just tell you guys about it as I finish reading it. So let's jump into it. If you've watched my videos before, you probably know I'm trying to get my physical TBR down as low as I can. We started July with 59 books, and bad news, that immediately jumped to 65 because I purchased 6 books at the beginning of July. And those 6 books were the remaining 6 books in the Hades and Persephone saga. But the book buying ban is back on, and future Faith, I'm going to be very disappointed in you if you got another book this month. But that brings me to the first book that I read this month, which is A Game of Fate, which is technically the second book in the Hades and Persephone saga, but it is just a touch of darkness from Hades' point of view. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars, which is the same thing that I rated the first one. I like Hades more than I like Persephone, so I did like this being from his perspective more. That being said, the beginning was very slow and the ending seemed very rushed. If it wasn't like that and the pacing was more even, it probably would have been a 4.5. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And the scenes that were the same in this book in A Touch of Darkness, aka basically every scene that they interact, it felt like we didn't get that much more of an insight on his perspective of those things. And so those parts really just felt copy and paste to me. In this book, I felt like it focused a lot more on their relationship than just Persephone herself. But this book, I felt like it was way more focused on just Hades than the relationship between Persephone's and Hades. Which, reading them back to back, it would have been a lot more boring reading this if it was mostly scenes between him and her, aka scenes we've already seen. But I do wish their relationship was more present in this than just the scenes about Hades, and that the scenes of them interacting, we would have gotten more of his side of things rather than it just kind of existing, if that makes any sense. All that being said though, again, I do really enjoy the plot of these books, so again, 4 out of 5 stars, I would recommend. So far, that is the only book that I've read this month, but already it's a better reading month than June was. Hopefully, I can still say that as the month continues. But lucky for you guys, you only have to wait the length of this video to find out. I have to wait the rest of the month. So we're back, a new setup. You know what that means? I finished my second book of the month, A Touch of Ruin, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was definitely my favorite one in the series so far. That being said, I have a few problems with it, and I will be spoiling it, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want spoilers for this book. This was my favorite one in the series so far, and I had that thought pretty quickly, and for quite a while it was a solid 4.5 stars, but then Persephone started to piss me off. Her mood swings are literally insane. So many of her feelings literally just come out of absolutely nowhere, and it did annoy me after a while, I cannot lie, especially with how consistent that was throughout the last half of the book. Her and Hades were so toxic in this book, and their communication skills are terrible. Honestly, I don't think I've read about a couple with worse communication skills than Hades and Persephone. And I have read YA romance books where the characters are literal teenagers. So you'd think 2 gods, especially one having existed for thousands of years, would be better at communicating. So that also kind of annoyed me. My biggest issue with this book was the characters, which I feel like I don't say a lot. It tends to be either the writing or the plot, and I love the characters. That being said, please don't get me wrong, I still did like the characters. And my issue wasn't every character, mainly just Persephone. What surprised me the most about any character was that I actually liked Apollo. Also, for some reason, I picture Apollo as Joseph Quinn from Gladiator 2. Like that exact look he had in that movie. I haven't even seen the movie, I've only seen the trailers, but I cannot stop picturing that. So that was great. The other thing I didn't like about this book was that the secret admirer was literally built up from the beginning. She first gets the secret admirer gift in like the 2nd chapter, I think. I don't know how to say his name, so we're just gonna call him the janitor. He's introduced very shortly after that, so immediately I was like, oh, it's him. And I was right. So I didn't really like how obvious that was. And then when she got him making the list later in the book, I was like, oh, I bet it's supplies to kidnap her. And I was right. But what I didn't expect to be on that list was condoms. Ugh. Ew. Did not like that. But like I said, this was built up from the beginning. I was expecting it to have a bigger ending than it did. That plotline was concluded in just a few pages. And don't get me wrong, I'm very glad it stopped when it did. I'm glad that it didn't continue with what he was doing to her in that moment. But I did expect a lot more, especially because, like I said, it was built up from the very beginning of the book. So that was a pretty unsatisfying conclusion to that part. That being said, I cannot wait to read Hades' point of view of that scene. He's gonna go feral and I'm gonna be obsessed. What can I say? I like a possessive man. I know I pretty much just did nothing but crap on this book, but again, I actually did enjoy it. I actually liked that there was a lot going on the whole time because it never felt slow. And for me, it's very easy for a book to feel slow. So I did really like that, especially considering how the book before this I felt started insanely slow. And as much as I love a protective man, I like how Persephone doesn't like how everyone just assumes Hades is going to do everything for her. Even though there were plenty of times where Hades did end up having to save her, I like that there were parts that she was able to hold her own and didn't just fully rely on him. Again, favorite book in the series so far, 4 out of 5 stars, I would recommend. New outfit, new setup, y'all know what that means. I finished my 3rd book of the month, A Game of Retribution, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. So this book was just the last book I read, A Touch of Ruin, but from Hades' point of view. And I think I mentioned that A Touch of Ruin was my favorite in the series at that point, and it was going to be a 4.5 stars, but then Persephone annoyed me too much that I bumped it down. Well, Persephone was in this one a lot less, so that didn't happen with this one, and it did get the 4.5 stars. And it is definitely my favorite in the series so far. Again, this part will contain spoilers, so skip to here to skip past this book, and I'll also go ahead and put those timestamps in the description. I liked what Hades was doing when he was out by himself away from Persephone. I thought those parts were very engaging. That being said, the amount of things he did and what exactly he did when he wasn't with Persephone that Persephone doesn't know about is proof that their communication skills are terrible. If my boyfriend was out doing the things he was doing and I found out that he didn't tell me as it was going on, I'd be pissed. And I felt the same way in the last book, that Persephone was going through all this stuff and she was like not communicating with Hades at all. Persephone is an adult, so I don't really want to say that there's an excuse for that, but Hades is literally thousands of years old, so you would think that at least he would be able to communicate properly with her, but apparently not. So far, of all the books, I think this one was paced the best. Still wasn't perfect. There was a couple parts where it dragged and a couple parts where it went way too fast, but overall I think the pacing was fine. I do think that she being the author, focuses more on the plot in Hades' books rather than his emotions, whereas in Persephone's books, a lot of it revolves around her emotions. At least it feels that way because she's so back and forth with them. There were some moments from A Touch of Ruin that I was really looking forward to read in this book because I wanted Hades' side of it, but then in this book, those parts weren't really touched on any more than they were in A Touch of Ruin. So I do think she could have done better with that. I'm now over halfway done with the series, but I do hope in the next 3 books something changes and we do get to see Hades' more emotional side. And I'm not saying he has no emotions, he obviously does, but I really feel like she could go way deeper, especially considering he has lived literally thousands and thousands of years. I guess because of that, it could be, oh, he has a good handle on his emotions, which is why we don't really touch on them, but at the same time, I think you should always touch on the main character's emotions and their feelings, because that's really how you get the readers to connect with them. Also, in case I haven't said it already, I love Thanatos, or Thanatos, I don't know how to say it, but guys, I actually love him, and I would love like a spin-off for him and see a romance story for him because I love him. Like, he seems so sweet. I know he like takes people when they die, but you know what I mean? He's a cutie. Really, other than those few critiques on her writing, I did really enjoy it. Again, it's my favorite one in the series so far. So again, 4.5 out of 5. I would recommend the series. And TBR 62. I'm back. Nice to see you all in the daytime. Not that I can see any of you, but you can see me. Hope it's nice to see me in the daytime. I finished my next book, A Touch of Malice by Scarlett St. Clair. Again, this review will contain spoilers, so skip to this timestamp. If you want to avoid that, it will also be in the description. I ended up giving this a 4.25 out of 5, and I have noticed a couple things that aren't necessarily a complaint about this book, but more of the series as a whole. This book was significantly smuttier than the rest. At least it felt like that. That's not really a complaint, just an observation I had. Let's be real, a ton of the books I read have smut, so that's not something that bothers me. This goes for the entire series, not just this book, but I've noticed that 9 times out of 10 that they have sex, it's at a very inappropriate or random time. It literally just comes out of nowhere anytime. You don't really know when to expect it, and that is kind of what I'm not really a fan of. Like, there was one time where they were literally at Mount Olympus with all of the gods and goddesses, and then they start, canoodling or whatever. Thankfully, Hades teleported them away, but I'm like, guys, I'm not a fan of that. I think, what is that called? Exhibitionism? I don't know. When you do it in public places in front of people, no, ma'am. And with the exception of Hermes walking in on them multiple times, that's kind of the only time they have sex in front of people. Except not really, actually. Now that I think about it, there's a ton of times where they're interrupted by people. But I think that was the only time they initiated it in front of people. And again, not a fan. Thought that was weird. I think I mentioned this when talking about both previous books. Persephone had the secret admirer, and it was built up the entire book. And then that plotline ended very abruptly, and it was very unsatisfying conclusion in my opinion. So I was kind of shocked at how big of an effect that had on this book, and understandably so. Being kidnapped and SA'd would have a mental effect on most people. I just kind of didn't like how it was so insignificant in the last two books and then played such a huge role in this book. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying how much trauma one can have or should have. Like I just said, I think this would be very traumatic for anybody, but I don't really like how such a tiny moment had such a massive effect on this book. Yet Persephone's trauma of being locked in the greenhouse for what I think was almost 20 years has essentially no effect on her. Like in the last two books when Hades trapped her in the underworld, she was fine. And I didn't bring it up while talking about the last books because it didn't really bother me that much then, but I don't really like how her being trapped in the greenhouse doesn't really have any effect on her because like I said, when she was locked in the underworld, she was fine. And I'm not saying her trauma for that is to be such a huge plot point, but I feel like it makes no sense that she has essentially no PTSD or anything from that. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying she shouldn't be traumatized by what happened when she got kidnapped, but I also think she should be traumatized by her being locked in a greenhouse for almost 2 decades. I really like the plot in this book as a whole. Honestly, I'm surprised that so much happens in less than 450 pages. That being said, at times it did get confusing, specifically with any sort of action scene. I forget what it's called, but basically the Olympic Games they have. That whole thing was pretty confusing to me. I kind of felt that way with every action sequence. Like a lot of the ending confused me as well. Demeter died, and while I didn't like her, I'm kind of torn on how I feel about that, just because there's still 2 more books, even though one of them is this book from Hades' point of view. So really there's just one more book of what happens after this. But I'm surprised that she died in this one and not that one. But who knows, when I read that book I might change my mind. I need a Thanatos and Lexa spinoff. Or if anyone has any recommendations where it's similar to Thanatos and Lexa, please let me know because I want that so bad. Most of the complaints I had after reading this book were more for the whole series and not just this book. Since this was the 5th book in the series I've read, I've noticed a pattern with some of these things, which is why I'm giving this a 4.25 and not anything less, because I actually did really like the plot of this book. A ton of things happen and I'm surprised that so much happened in under 450 pages. So of course there were times where I felt like a lot was going on, because there was, but honestly I kind of prefer that over it dragging on at times. So that was a positive for me, honestly. I would recommend this book and so far every other book in the series. Again, I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. TBR 61. Back with book number 5, Here and Now and Then by Mike Chen. Honestly, this isn't really the book that I wanted to read. However, only a few books on my physical TBR were available now on audiobook on Libby. And between those, this is just the one that I decided to read. Honestly, it was way better than I thought that it would be, and it was a bit different than what I thought it would be, which honestly in this case was actually a good thing. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. While I have watched a ton of movies with time travel, this is the first book that I've read about it. Even though I'm not new to sci-fi at all, I did find that it was kind of confusing at times, and a few of the chapters were too long and just dragged a bit. Specifically one at the beginning where it was just basically a conversation between him and his wife, and it was just very long, and at that point in the story I wasn't super attached to any of the characters yet, so it was kind of boring to me. I also felt that the beginning was very slow. That being said, I noticed that when books start insanely slow, they tend to end very rushed, but I didn't feel that way with this book at all. This book ended at the perfect time. The main goal of the story was met, and then we quickly wrapped up a little subplot, and then we had about 2 pages of a conclusion after that. Like I said, this wasn't really the book that I wanted to read, and at first, because of how slow it was, I wasn't really sure about it, but I'm really glad that I kept going because the second half of the book was really good. The central focus of the book is a father-daughter relationship, so if you are a dad with a daughter and you love sci-fi, I would recommend this book. Even if you're not a dad with a daughter who loves sci-fi, I would still recommend this book. Again, 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good. TBR 60. Okay guys, I'm back and I just finished book number 6 for the month, Around the World in 80 Days, and I absolutely hated it. Yep, honestly, didn't really like anything about this book. Notice how he's on a hot air balloon on that cover? In fact, every single cover I've ever seen of this book has the man on a hot air balloon. He never once steps foot on a hot air balloon. So, not sure what that's about. This is one of the most boring books I've ever read in my entire life. I love those journey movies, you know, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Journey to the Mysterious Island. If you got your information from this book in those movies, do not listen to it. I thought this was going to be some like super fun adventure book. No, it's literally just him taking trains and boats around the world trying to beat the 80-day mark. And you know what? I guess that's my own fault. Should have guessed that from the title. but I thought it would be more fun, more adventurous. No, it was so unbelievably boring. There was like an entire chapter at the end dedicated to explaining Mormonism, which was very out of place in my opinion. I don't know if Jules Verne was a Mormon, but that was there. I also am from a small town in Missouri, so imagine my surprise when Mr. Jules Verne mentions a town that's like 3 towns from me. That was kind of weird. What else was weird was that I guess I forgot that this is an old book and that back then they openly said slurs to people. Think of a slur. It was in this book. I listened to this on audiobook while I was doing my daily walks, and I would be jostled. I'd be surprised. I would almost get hit by a car. Again, it is an old book. I should have expected it, but it was very jostling, I will say. Like the last one, this isn't really the book that I wanted to read. Of the books on my physical TBR on Libby, I don't know why. I was just kind of called to this one, and I really wish I wasn't because I hated it. That being said, I'm glad now that it has passed and I never have to read it again. And you know what? I realize now I should have just read the back of the book instead of letting my own beliefs of what the book would be take over, because the back of the book actually does explain basically exactly what the book is, which is boring. Guys, I genuinely did not like this book. The only reason it's getting 2 stars instead of 1 is because I have this rule that if I'm able to finish it and not DNF it, it automatically gets 2 stars. Why I finished it if I hated it so much, honestly, I really couldn't tell you guys. Just know I'm never, ever, ever reading this book again. 2 out of 5 stars. I absolutely would never recommend this to anyone. That being said, TBR 59. That is the only good thing to come out of this book. We are back to where we started the month at, and we're definitely going to get at least one other book read, so we're going to end lower than we started, which is great. Please let the next book be better. I'm back with books 7 and 8 for this month. Book number 7 for this month was Treasure Island. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about this book other than it was fine. That's really all that it was, if I'm being honest. I didn't realize that Long John Silver was from this book. I don't know if this book like invented Long John Silver or if Long John Silver was a real pirate. I don't know, but I didn't realize that this book was about Long John Silver. Well, I guess it's not about Long John Silver, but Long John Silver is the main antagonist in the book. I did like it better than Around the World in 80 Days, but there were still times where this was slow and boring to me, especially at the beginning. I did not really like this book at first at all. But again, I really just don't have much to say about it. Nothing really stuck out to me as incredible. Nothing stuck out to me as terrible. If you don't like classics, I definitely would not recommend it. But if you do like classics, I do think that you probably would enjoy the book. And I'm sorry, I really just don't have that much to say about this book. Again, 3 out of 5 stars. 7th book of the month, TBR down to 58. And then I also finished A Game of Gods. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. The only real complaint that I have about this book is that I didn't like that it was also from Theseus's point of view and Dionysus's point of view, and I'm pretty sure the next book has their point of views as well, which I don't really like. I did like a couple of Dionysus's chapters, but the majority of them bored me, and all of Theseus's bored me as well. Hades and Persephone are finally communicating, and I love that for them. They still have a lot of work to go, but so far it's been better than any other book, I think. Even though this book is literally just a touch of Malice from Hades' point of view, their communication skills seemed way better than it was in Touch of Malice. I think I made this complaint with the other Hades POV books as well, but I still felt that the interactions between Hades and Persephone, aka the parts that are the same in these books and the Persephone POV books, are basically just copy and pasted. I really wish we got more in depth of what he was feeling during those interactions, rather than just rushing through it to get to what he was doing by himself during the time. I can't really decide whether I liked this one or A Game of Retribution better. I'm kind of leaning towards A Game of Retribution, but those two are definitely my top 2 in the series so far. One of my complaints with A Touch of Malice was that the action scenes were kind of confusing at times. I felt like they were a lot better written in this. It was way easier to follow, and the choreography of it made a lot more sense. After reading both A Touch of Malice and Game of Gods, I'm really confused with where they're going with the next book. The next one is the longest in the series so far. That being said, it's not split into 2, so it's not just from Persephone's and then there will be a second book about Hades. It's all combined into one book, which honestly I do like, because at times with these, it felt like I was literally just reading the exact same thing as I had just read. I'm so scared that they're not gonna get a happy ending and that Hades is gonna die. I cannot lie, I am worried about that. I think I told Ellie that a few books ago, but each book that I read, I get more and more scared that they're not getting their happy ending. And I really, really hope that they do. Because even though it was better in this book, their communication skills need a lot of work, and I don't want them to die before they can work on that. Again, I gave it 4.5 stars, and I would recommend, just like the rest of the series, TBR 57. That was my entire reading month, you guys. I started the month with 59 books on my TBR, and even though we read 8, I did buy 6, so we're only down to 57. 8 is the most amount of books I've read in any month so far this year, but I haven't had a 5-star read in over 2 months now, which for me is a very, very long time. So I am really, really, really hoping that I get one in August. I've now read 37 of the 43 books of my reading goal so far this year. If you're wondering why it's 43, it's because I always do one number above the books that I read last year, and last year I read 42, so this year my goal was 43. And at the rate I'm going, I will most likely read way more than 43 books. So very excited about that, but I think that is all that I have for you guys today. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow my Instagram in the description for more bookish content. I hope you're all having a fantastic summer. Love you guys. Bye!